Hey everyone, I'm Tiffany Martins, a practicum student at Centered Self Psychotherapy. I'm really glad to be here with you today to explore the world of psychodynamic therapy. In this presentation, we'll take a deep dive into its foundational theories, core interventions, and how the model continues to evolve in relational and culturally responsive ways. This work is rooted in both classical theory and contemporary practice, and I'll be weaving in reflections from my own clinical training and experience along the way. So whether you're just starting to explore psychodynamic ideas or already use them in your work, I hope this presentation offers insight, inspiration, and space for reflection on how we show up in the therapeutic relationship. Let's start by outlining what we'll be covering together today. We'll begin with an overview of psychodynamic therapy, what it is, what makes it unique, and how it differs from other therapeutic models. From there, we'll trace its historical and theoretical roots, highlighting key contributors like Freud, Klein, Jung, Bowlby, and others who shaped the model over time. We'll then explore core psychodynamic concepts such as transference, countertransference, projective identification, and the therapeutic frame, along with how unconscious processes and early relational patterns continue to influence our clients' lives. We'll look at how modern psychodynamic therapy has evolved to include relational, trauma-informed, and culturally responsive practices. From there, we'll move into practical application, how we bring these concepts into session, use supervision to support the work, and draw on our own self-awareness as part of the therapeutic process. We'll also reflect on ethical issues, cultural considerations, and the importance of identity, power, and positionality in the room. Finally, we'll wrap up with a summary and a few questions for reflection, designed to deepen your understanding and invite you to think about how you show up on your own work as a therapist. So let's dive in. At its core, psychodynamic therapy is about uncovering what lies beneath the surface. It assumes that much of our emotional life is driven by unconscious processes, those early experiences and relational patterns that shape how we see ourselves and others. Unlike brief or solution-focused models, psychodynamic therapy invites clients into a deeper journey of meaning-making. It is not just about symptom relief. It's about understanding where those symptoms come from and transforming the underlying dynamics that keep them in place. We help clients become aware of patterns, explore defenses, and integrate disowned parts of the self. It can be described as putting together an emotional puzzle, sometimes slowly, sometimes with big insight, but always with the goal of making the unconscious conscious. Psychodynamic therapy is a depth-oriented, insight-driven approach that centers the client's internal world. Unlike brief or problem-focused therapies, psychodynamic work is holistic. It aims to uncover patterns, resolve inner conflict, and foster emotional transformation through exploration of unconscious material. The therapeutic relationship itself becomes the medium for healing. What's alive between therapist and client, often rooted in early relational dynamics, becomes a doorway to insight. Themes like transference, defense mechanisms, attachment, and the therapist's use of self are all core to this model. What I love most about this approach is how it meets clients where they are, yet gently challenges their habitual ways of being. It allows space for clients to rewrite narratives that no longer serve them and to step into a more integrated, authentic self. Psychodynamic therapy traces its roots to Freud, whose early theories on the unconscious mind, the structure of personality, id, ego, superego, and defense mechanisms laid the groundwork for everything that followed. Freud introduced the idea that early childhood experiences, especially those involving conflict and unmet needs, leave lasting imprints that shape adult behavior. But the field did not stop with Freud. Melanie Klein, Donald Winnicott, and Ronald Fairbairn expanded psychodynamic therapy with a relational focus. Klein emphasized fantasy and projective processes in infancy, while Winnicott brought us the idea of holding and the false self, how children protect their vulnerability when caregivers are misattuned. Fairbairn and Bowlby brought us deeper into the world of internalized objects and attachment theory, how early caregiving relationships shape our internal world and adult relational patterns. Carl Jung added an archetypal symbolic dimension with his theory of the collective unconscious. He invited us to consider that healing is not just about resolving past wounds, but about individuation, integrating shadow and self to live with greater authenticity and purpose. Today's psychodynamic therapy is not static. It's flexible, integrative, and attuned to both cultural context and client individuality. One of the core principles of psychodynamic therapy is the belief that our thoughts, behaviors, and emotions are shaped not only by conscious awareness, but by unconscious processes. These unconscious dynamics, shaped by early relationships, traumas, and internalized messages, live under the surface and influence how clients feel about themselves and how they interact with the world. In therapy, these patterns show up in the way clients relate to us. A client might fear abandonment and react with distance or anxiety when sessions end. Another might unconsciously seek approval, mirroring dynamics from a critical or emotionally unavailable caregiver. These reactions are not random, they're transference. Past relational experiences projected onto the therapist. Our emotional reactions to clients, known as countertransference, are equally valuable. If we feel overly protective, criticized, or distant, it might be a reflection of what the client evokes in others. When we pay attention to our internal responses, we gain insight into how our clients have been experienced in the world and how they unconsciously recreate those patterns in therapy. But this work demands self-awareness. We have to hold our responses with curiosity and integrity. Rather than reacting, we pause, reflect, and explore these dynamics gently with the client. Through this process, therapy becomes a live laboratory for relational change. We're not just analyzing problems. We are co-creating new relational experiences that can be reparative and deeply transformative. Psychodynamic therapy has come a long way since the days of Freud's blank screen. Today, it is much more relational, human, and engaged. While we still hold boundaries and structure, we also show up as real people. Clients don't just need interpretations. They need attuned, consistent relationships that allow them to explore painful or unconscious material with safety and support. Modern psychodynamic work often integrates person-centered principles like empathy, congruence, and unconditional positive regard. These aren't just nice-to-haves. They're essential ingredients in building the therapeutic alliance. When we show up with presence and emotional availability, we model a different kind of relationship. One where clients can feel safe enough to let go of old defenses and begin to trust again. We also draw on trauma-informed care, paying close attention to pacing, choice, and the regulation of emotional intensity. For many clients, especially those with complex trauma or histories of relational harm, safety must be experienced before insight can occur. This shift from a distant interpretive stance to a more collaborative relational presence reflects a deeper understanding of how healing happens. Clients don't just heal through understanding, they heal through new experiences of being seen, held, and understood. In many ways, we become a new attachment figure, and the therapy itself becomes the corrective emotional experience. Although contemporary psychodynamic therapy has evolved in many ways, Freud's early work still provides the foundation. He introduced concepts like the id, ego, and superego, three aspects of the psyche in constant negotiation. The id seeks immediate gratification. The superego represents internalized morality, and the ego tries to mediate between the two in the reality of everyday life. Freud also described three levels of consciousness: the conscious, preconscious, and unconscious. Much of our emotional life, according to Freud, is governed by unconscious desires and conflicts, often rooted in childhood. When these are too painful or threatening, we use defense mechanisms like repression, denial, projection, or displacement to manage this discomfort. These defense mechanisms can be adaptive, but over time, they may lead to symptoms like anxiety, depression, or relational difficulties. Freud developed free association as a tool to bypass defenses and access the unconscious. He also believed in the importance of transference, the idea that clients will reenact past relational patterns with the therapist. While Freud's approach was more interpretive and less relational than modern models, his insights remain deeply relevant. We may not use a couch or remain silent in today's therapy rooms, but many of us still use Freud's structure as a starting point. His ideas give us a lens to understand how the past shapes the present and how insight can lead to change. Continuing with object relations theory, let's talk about how these internalized relational experiences show up in therapy. So, according to this model, we don't just carry memories of our early caregivers, we carry internalized representations or objects that live within us. These internal objects influence how we perceive ourselves, others, and our relationships. For example, a client who grew up with an emotionally unavailable caregiver may develop an internal belief that they are unworthy of attention or care. As adults, they might unconsciously seek out similar dynamics or struggle to trust when someone actually is available. Therapy becomes the space where these patterns are both enacted and explored. One defense we'll often see is splitting, the tendency to view others or the self as all good or all bad. This is a way to protect against the anxiety of holding conflicting feelings. Another process, projective identification, occurs when a client unconsciously evokes in the therapist the very feelings they cannot tolerate within themselves. A client who feels unlovable might behave in ways that make the therapist feel ineffective or rejected, recreating a familiar relational dynamic. Our job is to hold and contain these experiences with curiosity and care. When we don't react defensively, but instead gently name what's happening, we help clients integrate those split off parts of themselves. This is the reparative power of psychodynamic work. It allows clients to experience a new kind of relationship, one that holds the good and the painful together without falling apart. Carl Jung brought a profoundly symbolic and spiritual dimension to psychodynamic therapy. While he started as a close collaborator of Freud, Jung eventually diverged by emphasizing the creative and integrative aspects of the psyche rather than just focusing on pathology. One of his most influential ideas was the collective unconscious, a shared reservoir of archetypes and symbolic imagery common across cultures and time. These archetypes, like the hero, the shadow, the mother, or the trickster, show up in our dreams, fantasies, and stories. They also show up in the therapy room. For example, a client might unconsciously cast the therapist into the role of the nurturing mother or the abandoning father. Recognizing these symbolic patterns can offer deep insight into the client's internal world and emotional history. Jung also introduced the concept of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we reject or disown because they don't fit with our self-image or what others expect from us. Engaging in shadow work means helping clients explore those aspects with compassion and curiosity. Often, what we push away is where our greatest energy and growth potential lies. Another key Jungerian idea is individuation. It's the lifelong process of becoming one's truest self by integrating conscious and unconscious parts. For clients seeking meaning, identity, or spiritual connection, Jungian approaches can be particularly resonant. Symbol, metaphor, and dream work can provide entry points to truths that logic alone cannot reach. Jung's work reminds us that therapy isn't only about symptom relief. It can also be about soul making, a journey toward wholeness, depth, and personal transformation. Relational psychodynamic therapy builds on all we've discussed so far, but it takes a bold step forward by placing the therapeutic relationship at the center of the work. It's not just that we analyze relationships with others. It's that we pay attention to what's happening between us and the client in real time. In traditional psychoanalysis, the therapist was expected to remain a blank screen, to allow transference to unfold without interference. But the relational model challenges that idea. It argues that both therapist and client are co-creating the relational field. Our subjectivity matters, our presence matters, our emotional responses when processed with intention, can become some of the most valuable data in the room. Countertransference is no longer something to avoid. It's something to reflect on. If I find myself feeling dismissed, idealized, or overly responsible with a client, I ask, what might this be telling me about how they experience others, or how others have historically responded to them? These feelings, when held with care, can lead to deeper understanding and more authentic connection. Relational therapy also values authenticity. That might mean naming a rupture, setting a boundary, or even offering a gentle self-disclosure if it supports the work. The aim is not to be perfect or distant, but to be present, real, and responsive. This model is especially powerful when working with clients who've experienced relational trauma. When trust has been broken in the past, a safe, attuned, therapeutic relationship can be deeply reparative. It becomes a space where new relational templates are formed, not just talked about, but lived. Psychodynamic therapy is rich in tools and interventions. But unlike some models, these aren't typically scripted or manualized. Instead, they arise from presence, curiosity, and attunement to the client's process. Still, there are some core techniques that are used regularly. Interpretation is one of the most well-known. This involves offering insight into unconscious patterns, helping the client make connections between past and present. But timing is everything. Interpretation only works when the client is ready to hear it. It should land as an invitation and not as a judgment. Another key intervention is working through, revisiting a pattern or theme repeatedly over time. Insight is not a one-time event. Clients may need to process the same material from multiple angles before they can truly integrate it. Holding and containment come from Winnicott and refer to the therapist's role in creating emotional safety. When a client shares something painful or disorganizing, we don't just analyze it, we hold it. We regulate ourselves so that the client can stay with their experience without becoming overwhelmed or ashamed. We also sometimes use optimum frustration, a kind of therapeutic boundary setting that gently challenges the client's expectations. For example, not rescuing a client from discomfort too quickly, or not giving advice when what they really need is to sit with uncertainty. Done well, this evokes deeper material that can then be explored and processed. Each of these interventions supports the client's movement towards integration, autonomy, and emotional freedom. They're not about fixing the client, but about helping them reclaim parts of themselves that were split off, denied, or hidden in the service of survival. So, how does all of this theory come alive in the therapy room? Psychodynamic therapy is not a rigid protocol. It's an attuned, moment-to-moment process guided by curiosity, presence, and emotional depth. That said, there are a few key practices that are drawn on. One of the first steps in practical application is case conceptualization through a psychodynamic lens. This means looking beyond the symptoms to understand the client's inner world. How past relationships, unconscious defenses, and internalized beliefs are shaping their current experience. For example, if a client consistently feels rejected in friendships, we might explore whether they carry an internalized bad object from a parent who is inconsistent or critical. That narrative may be playing out again and again without their full awareness. Transference and countertransference remain crucial tools in this process. When a client reacts strongly to us, maybe with mistrust, idealization, or withdrawal, we don't just brush it off. we get curious. What relational script is being reenacted here? Likewise, if we find ourselves unusually frustrated, overprotective, or disengaged, we ask, is this a part of a projective identification? Is the client unconsciously inviting us into a familiar emotional role? Sometimes these dynamics escalate into therapeutic ruptures, moments of misattunement, conflict, or withdrawal. Rather than avoiding rupture, we welcome it as a doorway to deeper insight. Repairing the rupture together becomes a model for healthier relational patterns. Supervision plays a vital role in this work. It gives us space to process our own countertransference, recognize enactments, and ensure we're responding ethically and thoughtfully. It also keeps us grounded, because working at this depth can stir up our own material too. When we engage in psychodynamic therapy with integrity, we're not just helping clients, we're constantly evolving as therapists and humans. One of the most important tools we bring into the therapy room is ourselves. Not just our training or techniques, but our own inner world. In psychodynamic therapy, the therapist's self-awareness is not optional, it's essential. Our past relational experiences, attachment history, personal traumas, and even our cultural and social identities shape how we show up with clients. Whether we're aware of it or not, these factors influence how we hold space, set boundaries, and respond emotionally. That's why reflective practices like journaling, peer consultation, and personal therapy are foundational to ethical psychodynamic work. When we experience countertransference, it's often tempting to focus solely on the client's projections. But we also ask, what's being activated in me? Where does this feeling live in my story? Maybe a client's dependency stirs up our own fears of inadequacy, or their silence reminds us of a time we felt ignored. These reflections help us stay grounded and intentional, rather than reactive or enmeshed. Another area of self-awareness involves recognizing our shadow, the parts of ourselves we hide, deny, or devalue. If we haven't explored our own shame, anger, or vulnerability, we might subtly push clients away when they bring those emotions into the room. Shadow work helps us hold space for the full range of human experience without needing to fix, control, or distance ourselves. Finally, self-awareness also means being honest about our limits. We can't be everything for everyone. There are times when cultural humility, consultation, or referrals is the most ethical choice. The more deeply we know ourselves, the more attuned, responsive, and effective we can be for our clients. One of the most important and sometimes overlooked aspects of psychodynamic therapy is its ability to address cultural and systemic influences on the unconscious. Historically, psychoanalysis had a reputation for being Eurocentric and detached from real-world issues. But contemporary psychodynamic practitioners are working hard to shift that, integrating cultural humility, anti-oppressive practice, and intersectionality into the heart of our work. Our clients are not just shaped by their families. They're shaped by systems. Racism, colonialism, ableism, transphobia, and other forms of structural oppression don't just live out there in society. They get internalized. Clients may carry deep shame, self-blame, or internalized hatred rooted in the cultural messages they've absorbed. Psychodynamic therapy gives us tools to explore these messages and where they live in the psyche. For example, a racialized client may project mistrust onto the therapist, not because of personal history with the therapist, but because of a long lineage of being harmed or dismissed by people in positions of authority. Rather than getting defensive, we explore it, we name it, we hold space for it. We also have to look at our own positionality as therapists. Our identities, our race, class, gender, sexual orientation are present in the room whether or not we name them. They impact transference and countertransference. Being culturally responsive means reflecting on how our lived experiences may differ from our clients and how that impacts power, safety, and meaning making. Finally, we make space for all aspects of the client's identity, including their spirituality, family structure, and cultural beliefs. Therapy doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens within a complex web of cultural meaning. Our task is to listen, to learn, and to honor the client's experience with deep humility and care. As we begin to close, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've covered. Psychodynamic therapy is a rich, multi-layered approach that goes far beyond techniques. It's a way of understanding people in their full depth and complexity. At its core, it's about helping clients uncover and integrate the unconscious patterns that shape their emotional world, relationships, and sense of self. We started with Freud's foundational ideas like the unconscious mind, defense mechanisms, and the structure of the psyche. Then we moved into object relations theory, exploring how early relationships are internalized and how those relational templates continue to live in us. From there, we looked at Jung's archetypal lens, the idea that healing includes not just resolution of symptoms, but a movement towards wholeness. We discussed how modern psychodynamic therapy has evolved, becoming more relational, trauma-informed, and culturally responsive. We explored the therapeutic relationship not as a backdrop, but as the central space where healing occurs. We talked about how transference, countertransference, and enactments aren't problems to avoid, but essential tools for insight, connection, and transformation. We also examined our role as therapists, how our own histories, identities, and emotional responses are part of the work. We talked about ethics and cultural humility, recognizing that depth work must also attend to power, identity, and systemic dynamics. What makes psychodynamic therapy so powerful is its capacity to hold complexity. It doesn't rush to solutions. It honors nuance, and it creates space for clients to rewrite the internal stories that have held them back at a pace and a depth that feels authentic to them. If there's one thing I hope you take away, it's that this work isn't just about what we do. It's about who we are with our clients and with ourselves. To end, I want to offer a few questions, ones I now ask myself and invite you to consider as well. These aren't just theoretical questions. They're invitations to deeper self-inquiry, which is at the heart of psychodynamic practice. 1. How do your own past experiences shape your reactions to clients? Maybe a client's neediness triggers a part of you that you had to be the strong one, or maybe their withdrawal feels familiar, echoing a parent who wasn't emotionally available. What are you carrying into the room? And how can you hold that with compassion? 2, what are some transference or countertransference dynamics you've struggled with? Can you recall a time when a client idealized you or dismissed you and how that made you feel? Did you react, or were you able to pause and explore the meaning behind that interaction? These moments are gold when we can reflect on them rather than act them out. 3, how might your cultural identity impact unconscious relational patterns? What part of your identity feels invisible or visible in the room? How do you navigate power and difference when working with clients from backgrounds that differ from your own? And how do you stay open to learning, discomfort, and growth? And 4, what parts of yourself do you bring into the therapy room? And what parts do you hold back? Maybe you show up with warmth and care, but you hold back your vulnerability. Maybe you over-identify with certain clients and retreat with others. What do you notice? And how do you want it to shift? These are not questions with easy answers. They're questions we return to again and again, because doing depth work with others asks us to do it with ourselves. And that, to me, is the most humbling and beautiful part of being a psychodynamic therapist.